안녕하세요. 조선일보 워싱턴 특파원 강인선입니다. 여기는 미국 워싱턴에 있는 내셔널 프레스 빌딩이고요. 여러분들 마크 리퍼트 전 미국 대사 기억하시지요? 한국을 지난 1월 달에 떠나셨는데 그때 굉장히 섭섭해하시면서 송별 기자회견에서 눈물을 흘렸던 기억이 나요. 워싱턴에 돌아와서 새로운 생활을 시작을 했는데 최근에 만나보니까 여전히 한국 현안에 대해서 굉장히 관심을 많이 갖고 계셨습니다. 그래서 대사님하고 저하고 만나서 한미 관계에 관한 이야기를 우리가 편하게 이야기하는 거를 방송으로 만들어서 한국에 보내보면 어떨까 그런 생각을 하게 됐어요. 그래서 한번 시작해보자. 그래서 오늘 이 자리에 대사님을 모셨습니다. 대사님 안녕하세요.
네, 안녕하십니까 강선님.
네, 오랜만에 뵈요.
네, 좋아요. 네, 감사합니다.
워싱턴에 온 지 얼마나 되셨죠?
생각났어요. 하지만 2월 초에 워싱턴 DC 돌아왔어요. 하지만 아무리 심심하도 아기 둘 다 있으니까 아주 바빠요.
아기 몇 살이죠?
2살.
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 세준이?
세준이
2살.
2살, 맞아요. 다른 아기 세희. 미안해요. what is it? 3달?
석 달?
석 달,
So,
yeah.
100 days.
Yeah, 맞아요.
100일 잔치했죠.
맞아, 100일, 개인집 안에 100일 했어요.
떡도 있었어요?
예, 맞아요. 아렌델에 가고,
예.
떡집에 가고, 떡 많이 샀어요. 그래서,
예.
세희 100일 아주 잘해요.
아난데일이 이제 한인타운이잖아요.
네, 맞아요.
거기에 있는 한국 떡집에 가서
Yeah.
떡을 맞춰서
맞아요.
100일 잔치를 한 거죠.
네,
예.
맞아요. 네.
손님 많이 왔어요?
손님 없어요. 왜냐하면 it was like 수요일 밤에 갑자기 100일 만들었는데 그래서 시간이 없어서 초대 못 보냈어요. 네.
자, 그러면 우리 북한 얘기를 조금 해보죠.
네.
Yeah. Even in Trump administration, North Korea is one of the high priority
Yes.
issues. So what do you think about the current situation about North Korea?
Well, there's no doubt that the North Korean issue here in Washington is incredibly important. And in fact, my former boss, President Obama, before he left office, communicated to then incoming President Trump about the importance of this issue. And many news reports here called it the most important foreign policy issue of the Trump administration. So I would say in Washington, there is a mood of very serious nature, taking this issue very, very seriously. And again, I think it's at the top of the foreign policy agenda here in Washington, D.C.
Among all those options they have been reviewing, I'm very interested in regime change and reintroducing nuclear weapons to South Korea again and preemptive strike. Let's try analyze that one by one.
Yes.
Yeah. So how about preemptive strike? Do you think that that's something that we can use?
Well, I think every administration wants to avoid being in a situation where you have to take military action and have to use a preemptive strike. If you are talking about preemptive strikes, things are really, really dangerous at that point. So the goal, I would think, of the Trump administration, and was certainly the case of the Obama administration, would to be to stay out of a situation where the only option is a preemptive strike. And that's precisely why the President Obama did a number of things. Unprecedented sanctions at the UN Security Council, offers repeatedly of negotiations to the North Koreans, and building strong missile defenses, both in the Western Pacific and the U.S. homeland, to try to stay out of that situation of a preemptive strike.
But people say that Obama administration's strategic tolerance, strategic patience didn't work out very well. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, the policy was not strategic patience. It was a very active strategy with three prongs. Prong one, diplomacy, offer negotiations. But the North Koreans refused negotiations time and time again. So then used negotiations to isolate the North Koreans. And on that point, the North Koreans are the most isolated they've been. The 5 other members of the 6-party talks are more unified, and we have the strongest UN sanctions in place in history. Second prong was economics. And again, we have strong sanctions in place that are winnowing the hard currency coming into the North Korean regime. And finally, defense and deterrence. And what you've seen is our best capabilities, our best military assets being brought to South Korea, working hand in glove with strong South Korean military capabilities to provide a strong deterrent in the Western Pacific and on the Korean Peninsula.
But North Korea has been pursuing nuclear weapons and ICBM all the way since then. So I don't really understand, really that means work.
Well, look, what I would say is there were some successes under the policy, but there's work to do, very serious work left to do. And it doesn't mean just because you're not there yet to declare the entire thing a failure. So I think the point is to take the successes, build on those, and in my view, that means more sanctions, more pressure, while keeping the door to negotiations open and building up additional military assets and resources in the region.
Do you mean that we need to keep on putting more pressure against North Korea?
Yes.
As you did before?
Yes, and to quote a number of senior officials, sanctions and pressure are always a miserable failure until they work. And we saw this in the case of Iran most recently, that sanctions were working and eventually got the Iranians back to the table. The question to me is whether the Trump administration can influence the Chinese and work to really ramp up that pressure on sanctions to get the North Koreans back to the negotiating table.
While you were working as an ambassador in Korea, is there any point that the means that you used were really working?
Well, there's no question that, first of all, diplomatically, the North Koreans are more isolated, and that has caused them problems in the world. Second, there's no question, in my view, that hard currency available to the regime is coming down. And that makes the decisions harder for the regime. It makes it harder to spend more on nuclear and missile programs, more on elite, paying off elites, more on prestige projects. And all of that taken together sharpens the choice to go down the road of continued missile and nuclear development and risk even more sanctions, or come back to the table. And with hope and with a little good fortune, we hope that the North Koreans will make the right choice to come back to the table.
And what do you think about the regime change?
I am not in the regime change camp at this point. I know Mr. Armitage, former Deputy Secretary of State, not too long ago at a CSIS conference came out strongly for that option. So I'm not in that camp at this point. I still believe there is time to try a negotiated settlement to resolve the nuclear missile programs.
And how about reintroducing nuclear weapons to Korea?
I think it's a very bad idea.
Why is that?
Why is that? I think, first of all, there's strong deterrence and nuclear assurance under what we call the U.S. nuclear umbrella. I think those assurances are very strong, and in recent years and months, we've augmented those assurances, most recently by a senior high-level working group between the U.S. and the Koreans to look at ways to augment that.
Okay.
So that's one point. Second point is that you would have all sorts of other non-proliferation issues that would come out of reintroduction on the Korean Peninsula. What will the Japanese want to do? What will other nations see? There are non-proliferation implications. And finally, I think it does undermine the South Koreans' moral high ground on this issue. You in South Korea have that part of the peninsula free of nuclear weapons. And moreover, you have upheld your end of the agreement that was signed in the early 1990s with the North Koreans to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. And that gives you moral high ground in terms of international support that is needed. It gives you moral high ground in terms of non-proliferation, and it gives you moral high ground to pursue other issues. So I think that is not an insignificant element that would be undermined by the reintroduction of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you so much for your insights and thoughts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.